Isolation is a recurring factor in poverty and backwardness around the world, close quote. And you note that people who live in mountains, Afghanistan, Appalachia, you couldn't ask for more separated mountain communities, and yet you see much the same kind of backwardness. Isolation per se leading to backwardness. Explain that.
Well, I don't so much explain it as I simply give enormous numbers of examples of it. The mountain people being one, people who are living in isolated islands like the Canary Islands. Back in the 15th century when the Spaniards conquered the Canary Islands, they found the people there living as people had lived in the Stone Ages. In Australia, very similar things when the British arrived there in the late 18th century. They found the Australian Aborigines living again as people had lived elsewhere in the Stone Ages. Right. You find enclaves of groups that are isolated from what other groups are doing. You find the same thing, socially isolated, politically isolated, for whatever reason. What it suggests to me is that an individual really can do very little without a great number of other things, including what he learns from other human beings. And if you have some group of 3,000 or 2,000 living in some mountain village, whether in Italy or Kashmir, wherever, you're not going to find them keeping abreast of people who are living in port cities and in touch with the whole rest of the human race.
That although intellectuals pay a lot of attention to inequalities among racial and ethnic groups, quote, seldom has this attention been directed toward how the less economically successful might improve themselves by availing themselves of the culture of others around them, close quote. Now that is a very arresting formulation. Poor people can improve themselves by availing themselves of the culture of others around them. What do you mean by that?
I mean that the same things which allow some other people to prosper can allow them to prosper if they take advantage of those same things. The Scots were a classic example. They were one of the poorest and most ignorant people on the fringes of European civilization in centuries past. But once they, for whatever reasons, began to educate themselves, and especially to learn the English language, which became a passion. I mean, people all over Scotland, including Hume himself, were taking lessons in the English language.
Hume's first language was Gaelic?
I don't know if it was Gaelic, it was whatever
they spoke in those days. All right.
Yeah. From about the middle of the 18th century to the middle of the 19th century, the leading intellectuals in Britain were Scots.
Right.
I mean, you had Adam Smith in economics, Hume's in human philosophy, Black in chemistry. You go through the whole list. And so they could do that. But that was an extremely rare thing for an intellectual to say. Most intellectuals in most countries around the world see the issue as how those who are more prosperous should be brought down, rather than how, and moreover, that people who are lagging should cling to their culture. I don't know how you're going to keep on doing what you've always done and get results that are different from what you've always gotten. One of the real problems, and this is not peculiar to the United States or to any group in America, ethnic leaders, particularly leaders of groups that are lagging, are a major obstacle to advancement because their self-interest is in keeping their group isolated. And isolation has been tied in with poverty for all kinds of groups and all kinds of settings around the world.
Al Sharpton versus Ben Carson.
Yes.
Al Sharpton is bad for African Americans. Yes. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but unfortunately, the Al Sharpton types have been the rule rather than the exception for groups around the world. Back in 19th century Bohemia, where the Germans, again, for a whole lot of...
How do you know all this?
Because of my research assistants.
All right, go ahead. 19th century Bohemia.
The Germans had all kinds of advantages that came out of history, which you could go into if you felt like it. But, for example, if you were in the early 19th century Bohemia and you wanted to go to high school and you were a Czech, you would have to learn German because there were no high schools in the Czech language until 1848. And so, but that was a condition common throughout Eastern Europe, that the Slavic languages became literate centuries after the German language did. And therefore, there was a huge buildup of knowledge in the German language that was not equally available in Slavic languages at that time. And so if anyone who wanted to become an educated person and go into the professions, they had to learn German. Now, you would think that the leaders, if they were looking out for the best interests of their followers, would say, for heaven's sake, learn German and move on up. No, they fought tooth and nail against it.